Hi all, this is a relatively short video on calf housing. We have talked about all the pre-weaning management aspects with regard to feeding, right? So this is a short video on calf housing, right? So housing is fortunately not too complicated. Right. So you will learn that there's a variety of housing such as indoor, outdoor, individual, group pens, etc., etc. But whatever the type of housing may be, so they have to be designed in such a way so as to minimize the mortality rate, morbidity rate, and therefore, by minimizing pathogen exposure, and it's mainly, as you know, calf diseases are respiratory diseases and GI tract diseases, diarrhea, and so on. So respiratory disease is often triggered by failures in management, not just respiratory diseases, as I've said repeatedly during dairy management. When it comes to production and animal production, right? So diseases usually represent a failure of management. So same here, right? Calf pneumonia. Of course, there is a etiology, some kind of a bacterium or virus or whatever, right? But that is triggered by poor management conditions like excessive dust, right? So that could be a problem in the bedding you use, right, or the litter. Ammonia, right? So because there's plenty of urine being produced, if there is no mechanism for the urine to properly drain or to be regularly cleaned, there can be excess ammonia, right? Or it could be the draft, cold weather, right? So these are the factors that trigger these diseases, right? Morbidity. So if you want to keep morbidity rates low, you have to make sure that the calf housing has been properly designed, right? So respiratory diseases, GI tract diseases, hoof and interdigital diseases, right, and joint and skeletal abnormalities. So all together, your housing should be designed in such a way that these will be minimized. Right, so like I said earlier, they can be individual hutches or pens or cubicles as you call them. So remember, there are two different terms, right? Calf pen or calf cubicle or calf hutch is one thing, whereas if you say calf barn or calf unit, that's a different thing, right? So when you say calf pen, hutch, or cubicle, that refers to an individual calf pen, right? Whereas when you say a calf barn or a calf unit, it refers to the building encompassing all these different calf pens, right? So I'll show those as we go along, but do pay attention to these two terms, right? And then you also have to make sure that because like I said earlier, I've said many times, calves are essentially immune compromised, right? Because they are not immune competent yet, right? Because they have to develop active immunity from scratch, where they have zero immunity when they are born, colostrum, and then active immunity. So therefore we want to keep them separate from the adults as much as possible. That is one of the reasons we separate the calves soon after birth also. But then separating the calf from the mother and then keeping them one wall away from the adult barn is no good, right? Because if the adults are in the vicinity, the calves will get exposed to all the germs, pathogens from the adult population, right? So you have to make sure that it is isolated from the older animals, right? And of course, you have to have proper ventilation, good quality air, right? So you have to, they have to be ventilated, but then at the same time, especially if it's in a colder climate, it should be draft free, right? So this will depend on the climate. Are you doing this in Hambantota and Mullatiu, or are you building this in Nuwara, right? So in Nuwara, you will want to keep the calf pens indoors, right? But with high walls in the calf unit, right? So to minimize to minimize the draft, cold draft. Whereas in Hambantota, right, you will want to have open walls or short walls to maximize ventilation, right? So there is no hard and fast rule on this. It will depend on the climate, right? So the bedding should always be as dry as possible. Wet bedding will predispose to not only these conditions, hoof problems, they will slip, right? And joint and skeletal problems can arise from that, right? And also will predispose to these because they will act as a medium for microbial growth, right? So they have to be dry as much as possible, and that is also, as you would understand, is related to the level of ventilation, right? So we said that it has to be away from the adult animal barns. However, it should be also in a place where observation is easy. And so if you look at some of the NLDB farms in Sri Lanka, right, the calf barn is located very close to the management quarters, manager's office, right? So when the manager goes out of the office to attend to something, he essentially walks past the calf unit. And so if there's something wrong with them, he can easily attend to it, right? And sometimes, of course, in Sri Lanka, there is excess labor, kind of. But even abroad, right, Western countries where they have minimal labor, they assign a laborer to the calf unit because you have to keep them under observation as much as possible. And of course, these things change now with the introduction of CCTV cameras, right? You don't have to have it right next to the manager's quarters for him to be able to monitor it, right? So even if it's far away, you can always observe it through CCTV camera. So that is something that has changed. But generally, we say it should be close to a manager's office or whatever, so that it can be properly observed regularly, right? So you have to make sure that pens are clean between use. So when you say between use, between batches of calves, right? Just like poultry, right? All in, all out system. You completely sanitize between two batches, right? So you want to do the same with calves also. Otherwise, if a particular batch of calves had a diarrhea or pneumonia, and the bedding and the area was contaminated by those microbes, there is a possibility that it will carry on to the next batch as well. This is especially so with synchronized calving, where you'll get batches of calves, right? So you have to make sure in such scenarios that the calf unit is properly cleaned, right, sanitized uh, between batches, right? And if it's individual, small scale operation where there are individual animals, again, still you have to sanitize the calf pen between two calves, right? Okay. So like I said earlier, if it's rainy, cold weather, they can be placed indoors, whereas if it's warm, dry weather like in Hambantota, right, they can be placed outdoors, right? And there should be two buckets, right? So what should these buckets be for? Is it for concentrate, water, milk, uh, or roughage, right? So think about it. And in older generation calf pens, you will also see a hay rack. I will be showing a photograph of such a hay rack. But as you know, nowadays we don't recommend feeding hay to calves. Therefore, this hay rack is an obsolete component in modern calf pens, right? Designs. You will not see a hay rack, and there has to be a bottle. You know why? So even though we recommend feeding straw, right? We don't recommend feeding straw in a rack, right? We recommend feeding it mixed together, chopped and mixed together with concentrate or calf starter, as I've mentioned several times. Right now, they have to be large enough for to allow for calves to turn around, lie down, stretch their limbs, right, and all that. But at the same time, making them extra large, unnecessarily large, that adds to the cost, space, and all that. So that is not necessary, right? So there is a usually we recommend about a 1.5 square meter calf pen square area. So I'll go into the details on that. So that comes to about 3.5 feet by 4.5 feet approximately. So, and of course this also is not a figure that is set in concrete, because this ideally it has to depend on the size of the calves, right? So Jersey calves can be, or Jersey crossers can be as small as 22 kilograms at birth, whereas large Holstein calves can be as large as 35-40, right? So ideally they should have two separate sizes of the pens, right? Not essential, but ideal, right? Right. So another important thing, although you are separating this for a large enterprise, you have to make sure that there is, visual and tactile contact with animals in adjoining pens. They should not be in concrete cubicles where they cannot see a single other calf, right? Because at some point in time they are going to come out of these calf pens, and let's say, for example, at 2 months, and they come out and they see other calves, and then they'll get the shock of their life. I've never seen a calf before. All I've seen are these human beings that come in the morning and afternoon to feed me, milk and concentrates, etc., etc., and suddenly I'm seeing a calf. What the hell is this? And the calf will get stressed about it, right? So but if you make sure there is visual and tactile contact with other calves, then this stress will be minimized when the calf is released from the individual pen one day, right? So you have to make sure that all these criteria are fulfilled when you design a calf pen and calf barn, calf unit. Okay. I mentioned a little bit about ammonia and dust earlier. So it has been shown that ammonia levels in the first 4 months can be critical, and not just the short-term effects of pneumonia, etc., but it can impact the long-term effects like age at first calving, right? So you have to. That is another reason why you need to make sure that your calf pens are clean and ammonia levels stay minimized, right? So at 25 parts per million, right, they are known to irritate the respiratory tract mucosae and cause respiratory disease, right? So those are the short-term effects, and this is the long-term effects. So either way, you have to make sure you minimize all these bad things, dust, ammonia, all other gases, etc. So what good ventilation does is it removes the excess heat, excess water vapor, microorganisms, dust, gases like ammonia, and it provides a uniform distribution of air, right? So these are compulsory factors that you need to consider when you're designing a calf barn, right? So again, like I said earlier, calf pens can be placed indoors in cold or rainy weather, or during winter time in Western countries, whereas outdoors in warm weather or during summer and spring in European countries, right? Temperate climates. And they are usually individual pens, but sometimes when they get older, right, they will be moved to group or communal pens as well, depending on the management system. Right? Some of them are designed in such a way that they have a pen and run concept, right? So the calf can go out when it's warm, when it's cold, calf goes inside the pen, right? And modern ones also are fixed with automatic feeders, which are expensive. I have not seen this in Sri Lanka, but you have such modern calf pens as well in Western countries. So this is a very, very modern calf pen. As you can see, they are individual pens, right? So they have plastic walls. They've been built with plastic. Two buckets, right? Door handle, bottle for milk, right? So two buckets for concentrate and water, right? So those were individual pens. So this is actually uh, I got these photographs from Australia. I think this was a Lippincott farm, if I remember right. Uh, so this was like the second largest dairy farm in Australia, or New South Wales, something like that, right? So you see how they can put these pens up, right? So notice that these pens are kept right on the floor, right? Whereas in Sri Lankan situation, you see that some of them are placed raised above the floor level, so that you can easily clean them, right? So in this case, you'll have to open the door and remove everything through the door. But if you have a slatted floor, the refuse, the cow dung, the calf dung, the calf urine will fall onto the floor, right? But this is a different setup. So these are collapsible, as you can say, as you can guess, right? So when they are not being used, they can lie against a wall like this, because in certain countries, certain management systems, you have all these seasonal carving, right? So you don't have to have these pens put up throughout the year, right? So they can put them up only during the carving season, and then afterwards they can use the space for something else by collapsing the calf pens in such a manner, right, and just store them until next year. And so this is a setup of where it's outdoors, right? So this was indoors, as you could see, right, but with open sides, right, depending on the climate, because it's usually spring carving, right? So spring is not that cold, right? So you can afford to keep it outside even in temperate weather, right? And again, an instance of outdoor, but these are a little different, right? You can see the two buckets, but this is the pen and run system that I talked about, right? Pen and run, right? So the calf can come out whenever it wants. If it's feeling too cold, can go inside and sleep inside the pen. Okay, so again you can see a lot of them placed outside, and you can see this tactile and visual contact that I talked about. When they come out, they can see calves, right? Even in this setup, they are able to see the calves in front of them, right? So there is always this visual contact, is they make sure that they have it, right? And okay, this is another setup, another pen and run system, right? um, this was actually again I took from Australia. So this is actually a smaller scale farm, right? So they had these calf hutches outdoors, right? There is no run as such, but if I remember right, these calves were almost like tethered, right? You can see this rope like thing here. So they were tethered, so they couldn't go too far away, but if they wanted to come out, they could come out, something like that, right? So notice the bedding here. So it looks like it's wood shavings, right? So which can be, once it gets dirty, it has to be changed, right? So again, notice that this must be a relatively cold climate place. See, the walls are high. See, there are some windows at the top allowing sunlight and ventilation to come in, right? So almost completely separated from the calves, but very cheap setup, right? Cost effective. But in Sri Lanka, we can't do this, especially in the warm areas, because if you do this, calves will bake inside these pens, right? No ventilation, right? So this is what it would look like when there are calves inside, right? Same thing. So these are three examples I got from Sri Lanka. I believe this is Manic Palama, this is Ridhyagama, and this is Ambewala, New Zealand farms, right? See, this is the slatted flow that I was talking about, right? This is a slatted flow, two buckets, right? Two buckets again here. This is the hair rack. I hope you can see that, not the best resolution photograph. That's the hair rack, right? So that is where in the old traditional system they used to store hay where the calf can nibble, little by little, right? So you see there is no bedding here. There is a straw bedding here, right? But again, like I said, so I might give this as a spot exam and ask you to guess where this is, right? So if you say this is Ridhyagama, that's a poor guess because in Ridhyagama or Hamban Tota or Mulatiu or Jaffna, you would not build a calf pen with minimal ventilation. See, minimal ventilation, right? So you have these brick walls on three sides and only the front door is open. But whereas this one, it's open from all four sides in warm weather. Right, so these are the things you need to take into consideration. Right, so these again Ridhyagama. So these are the individual calf pens, right? And this whole building is the calf unit or calf's barn, right? So they have multiple calf barns like this, right? Because I think they said something like, if I remember right, 400 calf units, calf pens, right? 400 calves at any given time point, so they have to have a lot of these, right? So notice how the buckets have been kept, right? They have a little rack-like structure here that can be easily cheaply built, and the two buckets going in, right? So it's a side view of the same thing, right? So this is actually the rear view. Rear view, front view is where you had the buckets, right? Okay, so this is again a farm in Australia. I think it's the same as I said earlier. Not Lippingcott. I said Lippingcott. I think it's Leppington, right? So these are little old calves, right? They're not weaned yet, right? They're not weaned yet, but at a certain stage, they move them out of the individual calf pens, right? And so these are the calf starter, feeding trough is. So here you have bedding. Here there is no bedding, right? So calves have the choice of, choosing their grounds, right? So this one has, so you see the different units, right? So all this is the calf barn, right? So this someone by the name of Dr. John House, a professor at the Sydney University, very well respected authority in dairy industry, not only in Australia but the world over. He has taught me many things. I have learned a lot from him. Right, so notice these are called automatic calf feeders, right? So automatic calf feeders. So calves can come from the front side, of course, the rear, right? And there are automatic feeders for milk as well as for concentrates, right? But in this case, it's not for concentrates; it's concentrates on the trough, right? So here's another example where uh, this is not a toilet, right? The brown stuff you see is calf starter, in fact, right? So you see how calf starter is dispensed from top, right? When a calf comes here, and this is the milk, right? See the milk spilled on the floor, right? So automatically dispensing nipple, right? So some of these even have, the calves have a tag on their neck, right? And when the calf comes near the dispenser, the dispenser will decide based on the calf's tag. Okay, you have already have had your day's quota. No more milk for you. You get out, right? So the calf will nibble at the nipple for a few minutes. No milk, so the calf will go back. Whereas another calf comes, the calf has only drunken, let's say 50% of its daily quota, so the machine will automatically dispense milk, right? So those are automatic calf feeders. Okay, so notice that I turned 180 degrees. Look at the
Go
flow.
to here.
So let me rewind and go back, right? So this is the, I'm looking, let's say I'm looking in the direction of the north, north direction. Now I'm going to turn to the south, right? I'm slowly turning, right? So 90 degrees turn, 180 degrees turn, right? So look at the flow, right? So that when the calves come and if they pass feces or urine during the eating and drinking, it will not spoil the surface, right? It will not soil the surface. It will go down through this mesh onto the underlying area, which they can later on remove, wash and remove, right? So that's what the flow looks like on this. And now it leads
Go to
to
here.
the run outside, right? Sorry. Okay, here goes again. Sorry about that. Through the door. So these indoors, right? So
Go
these
to
lead
here.
into the outdoors, right? See, notice. So this is not the only one. There are parallel other pens as well, right? Meaning, there are multiple uh, pens. These are multiple runs, right? So there is a pen adjacent to each of these with a automatic feeder, right? Right. So you'll see calves. What you see here are calves, right? Okay. So let's continue the video. So I'm turning back towards the north again, and you'll see the multiple doors from the multiple runs, right? Each of these lead to this building. And see, so that is the advantage of this. You see the calves jumping around, running around. They are really happy. That visual and tactile contact that we talked about earlier, right? So those are the pros in this system, right? Those are the benefits. See the calves jumping around. However, of course, you can think of cons of this system also, where it will be expensive setup, right? And then if you think of the flow here, right? It's either grass or soil. So soil can get muddy. If it's grass, then they can consume grass that they're not supposed to eat, right? At this stage, we have to make sure they eat only straw, right? But that won't happen if in such a setup. If you don't have that properly, of course, if you have it properly cemented and paved and all that, then that will be a different story. So that's why I said the initial investment will be higher. Okay, right. So I hope you got an idea. So this is a bit of an advanced method. This was actually a teaching farm kind of thing, right, attached to the university. Right. So I promised to give you dimensions of calf pens. Right. So all those systems we saw earlier, right, from the world over and Sri Lanka as well, right? But now if you are a vet and you have to, instruct somebody to build their own calf pen, what dimensions would you give, right? So dimensions are typically, we say, so depending. So like I also said earlier that we can't give set dimensions because certain breeds can be smaller than others, right? So we say usually 3 to 3.5 feet wide, right, and 4 to 4.5 feet long. So if it's a large calf, it should be on this side, and if it's a small calf, it should be on this side, right? So if it's a Jersey farm, right, then the dimension should be 3 feet wide, 3 feet tall, 4 feet long. Whereas if it's a Holstein-Friesian farm, then they should be 3.5 feet wide, 3.5 feet tall, 4.5 feet long, right? And something very important is that it has to be raised 10 to 12 inches above the level of the ground so that you can easily have access to the underneath of the calf pen. You can pass a mammoty or udalla or a shovel and remove the dung, right? You can easily wash away the urine with a hose with water, right? So the floor should be made of slats. Slats are like reaper, right? So reaper are usually 2 inches wide, one half an inch thick. I think it's half an inch or 3/4 of inch thick, and 2 inches wide, right? So you should not use wide planks or lally, right? Because if you use, let's say, 10-inch wide lally or planks, then the urine and feces will stay on top of it. It will not fall down and right through the gaps. But if you use reaper, right, then it will through the slats, between the slats, it will fall onto the ground. And now you saw the on the earlier video that I showed you saw the mesh, right? So that mesh is not just regular kukuldal, right? It has to be strong enough to hold the calves, to bear the weight of the calves. If you have access to such mesh, that's also fine. Right? But the point here is they should not be too far, because if they are too far away, the calves hooves can get injured. They can go in between two slats and get injured, right? But if they are too close enough, then the urine will of course fall in between the slats, but the feces will stay on top. So you have to work out a balance where the hoof doesn't go in and get caught, and but it's at the same time it's not too narrow that the feces cannot get out, right? So you have to come to a compromise between those two, and what we usually say is half an inch to 1 inch spacing between two adjacent slats, and then calf foot won't get stuck or injured, and then also it's still wide enough for the feces to drain down, right? So you have to make sure slats are fixed with a spacing of half an inch to 1 inch spacing, right? So that's the flow. And when it comes to the sides, right, so they again can be either wood, or it can be reaper, it can be metal, right, it can be box bar, it can be galvanized bar, right, depending on the cost for any of these. So the recommendation is they shouldn't be too wide. If you have 1.5 feet between two adjacent bars, calf will come out, right? No point having a pen. But if they are too close, it will be expensive, right? So we usually say about 10 to 12 inch spacing between two vertical or horizontal bars, so the calf cannot come out, and then at the same time it maintains the strength and necessary enclosure to hold the calf in with a minimal cost. I mean, you can do mesh if you have that at free of charge. Let's say if you in a particular farm there is plenty of mesh, right? The green plastic color one coated ones, or kukuldal or 1 inch or 2 inch mesh, plenty of that, right? So if you as a farm manager or as a veterinarian, if you fail to notice that and you say in spite of that, that is lying there idle doing nothing, you tell the farm owner, okay, we should get down reaper, or we should get down galvanized bars, or we should get down box bars, you are a failure, right? If you see that, right? Because you should be able to, if you are smart enough, you should be able to use the resources that are freely available or at a low cost to the farm, right? Same goes with bedding, right? Now we say usually sand is the best bedding, right? So typically the bedding material available for us are sand, straw, or wood shavings, or the rice hull, right? So let's say if you have a you have plenty of straw freely available, right, on the land, but you, the veterinarian, insist, no, we have to use sand, which adds like 50,000 rupees extra cost for the farmer, right? Then you're not doing a good job, right? You're a theory guy. You can't, think practically and apply what you learned in an applied manner, right? So that is not good. You have to be able to use the resources that are available at the farm, right, or near the farm, or the owner can have access at a lower cost, right? If you're smart, you need to be able to utilize those and to achieve these recommendations using the lowest cost, right? And of course, one of the sides will have to be a door for the calf to come out and go in. And then you also need to have two buckets, right? Either you can have a ring or you can have a plank and place the buckets inside like you saw in the Ridyagama pictures and so on. Right now, what if in case of a really small scale farmer, right? Of course, you can't afford this. That is when they might not even be able to afford what I just showed, right? So you can still do something very simple, right? Look at this example, right? So the adult cattle barn is indoors, right? Let's say the farmer doesn't have a different place, is enclosed in a very small space, restricted to a small space. You can still place the calf pen away from the adult animals. Let's say under a tree so that it's shady and nice and cool. You can have a simple structure like this, as long as you can maintain those fundamentals we talked about at the beginning. Good ventilation, draft free. Of course, the warm climate, draft is not a problem, right? No gas accumulation, doesn't get wet if it rains. Of course, you'll have to bring the animal indoors or have a small roof on top. So as long as you use your common sense, right, and go with those fundamentals, you're fine. You don't have to have a posh calf pen like this, or even the one that I showed earlier with the dimensions, right? So something you can do is, you have to try and introduce to the Sri Lankan system is this bottle, right? So you can make something like this. Shouldn't cost a lot. You can use these Kale Kambi or whatever and get a welding shop to make it for you, right? Which you can use to hang the bottle like this, right? Because on eBay they are available at like $14, but you don't have to do that. You can easily um, produce one of these, right? Easily in Sri Lanka at a very low cost. Okay. Right, so that is all for calf housing. I will see you next on calf weaning, right? So we have talked about calf feeding and calf housing, the main management aspects of calf management, and then we will see you on calf weaning.